Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav and we'll be learning today Emir Hashem Daf Kuf Yud Dalet Amud Aleph excuse me, as well as Kuf Yud Dalet Amud Beis, which will catch us up another day on the Dirshu schedule. So we're continuing to learn the halachos of the Dalet Minim, and we pick up today on the bottom line of Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Beis in Siman Taf Reish Mem Vav Sif Hey, where we continue to learn the halachos that apply to the hadasim. Says the Makaber in Sif Hey, Limitzvah, in order to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Dalet Minim properly, Ba'inon kol shir orech hahadas sheyehei avos. Lichatchila, preferably, in order to be Mekayim the mitzvah the proper way, what we want is that the entire length of the hadas should be what we consider avos. It should be plated, it should be covered, as we have described, with 3 leaves on every cane. It should be mishulish, the entire hadas branch that we need for the mitzvah, the entire length, a 3 tefach hadas, the entire thing, it should be kulay mishulish. Every level, every base should have 3 leaves coming out and covering the branch. That's a mitzvah. However, continues the Mechaber, and he says, uli ikuva, as far as what we require for minimal requirements, as far as what would be li'ikuva, if we don't have that, it would prevent us from being mekayim the mitzvah, or li'ikuva berubai. We must have at least roiv, at least the majority of the length of the hadas branch has to be mishulish, it has to be considered avos, and the Ramah puts in, va'afilu einoi beroishai. While we do need roiv, we do need the majority of the length of the branch, it does not have to be the upper part of the branch. We don't need the roiv to be located on the top of the branch. The roiv of the hadas branch that is mishulish could be starting from the bottom and going the majority of the way up, and the rest of the top of the hadas maybe is not mishulish. That would be okay. As long as we have roiv, that is considered a kashera hadas. Again, it's not the mitzvah lechatchila. For that we want kulei mishulish. We want the entire length of the hadas to be mishulish, but you could still be mekayim the mitzvah. If you don't have roiv, if the majority of the branch is not mishulish, then it's not a kashera hadas. And of course, this is based on the concept of rubai kikulei. If we have roiv, if the majority of the branch is mishulish, rubai kikulei. It's as if, lamdish, it's as if the entire hadas is mishulish. But we don't want to come on to rubai kikulei. We want to be mekayim the mitzvah properly. We want it to be kulei mishulish without the lamdus of kulei mishulish. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah here on Kuf Yud Dalet Amud Aleph, Ois Katan Yud Ches, Uli Ikuva Berubai. Explains to Chavetz Chaim, Hainu, what does this mean that roiv of the hadas is going to be mishulish? Hainu, Shahahadas Sheshi Urai Hu La Yoiser B'Shteim Osir Gudlin Kidlakamon B'Simin Taf Reish Nun. We're going to see later on in Siman Taf Reish Nun that the required length of a hadas is 3 tvachim. Now, a tefach is made out of 4 gudlin. A gudel is, you see my thumb here on the camera, the wide part of the thumb, the first joint, the first knuckle of the thumb, that width, that is what's called a gudel. That's the width of a thumb. A tefach is made up out of 4 gudlin. 3 tvachim is thus 12 gudlin. So the Mishnah Berurah says like this: Hahadas sheshi urahu la yoiser b'shtei maser gudlin. A hadas that is not required to be any lengthier than 12 gudlin. Kidlakamon b'simin taf reish nun. Ein tzarich avos bekulai. Strictly speaking, we don't need it to be kulai mishulish. We don't need all 12 gudlin of the hadas to be mishulish. Rak shiva gudlin yehei avos. As long as roiv, as long as 7 out of 12 of the gudlin are mishulish, dahainu shloisha olim b'chol kain, the Chavetz Chaim is reminding us, what does it mean that it's avos? It means that you have a minimum of 3 leaves on every level surrounding the branch. So you have 7 gudlin of the length of the hadas, which is avos, which is mishulish, v'hachamisha gudlin, and the remaining 5 gudlin of the hadas, afilu nechsa legamri, Shenashru olav, even if not only are the other 5 gudlin not mishulish, maybe all the leaves have fallen off of the other 5 gudlin. So you have a hadas which is 12 gudlin long, it's 3 tvachim long, roiv of it is mishulish, so that 7 gudlin is mishulish. The remaining 5 gudlin are either not mishulish, or it doesn't even have any leaves. All the leaves have already fallen off. Oy, shalai hayu avais, it has leaves, but it's not mishulish. Dahainu shahayu olav shnayim al gabe shnayim. Maybe the remaining 5 gudlin of the hadas, each cane has 2 leaves. Oy trei v'chad, or maybe it's the hadas shaita that we spoke about yesterday. Maybe on the other 5 gudlin of the hadas, you have 2 leaves on one level, and then another leaf either a little higher or a little lower. But in all of these cases, you have roiv of the hadas, 7 gudlin, is exactly the way it's supposed to be. 7 gudlin are kulei mishulish, 3 leaves on the same level at every cane. It's the other 5 gudlin where either the leaves are missing, or it's not mishulish, maybe it's 2 leaves on every cane, or the rest of it is a hadash shaita. In those cases, kevan sherubai haya avos, since the majority of the hadas is avos in a proper manner, the rest, the 7 gudlin that make up the roiv, are mishulish, kosher, rubai kikuloi, that hadas is kosher. Okay, so right now the Chavetz Chaim has explained to us exactly the halacha that the Mechaber says. We now understand fully what it is the Mechaber said. We need roiv of the length of the hadas. The hadas is 3 tvachim. Now let me just give you the measurements that we're familiar with. A gudel is somewhere between 3/4 of an inch, depending on who you paskin, like a minimum of 3/4 of an inch, a maximum of an inch. So a tefach is 4 gudlin, so that and hadas has to be 3 tvachim. So that means that the hadas is somewhere between 9 inches and 12 inches in length. Roiv of the hadas has to be mishulish kidaboi. It has to be properly mishulish, 3 leaves on the same level at every cane, at every base. The rest of the hadas doesn't have to be mishulish. L'chatchila we want it to be, but li'ikuva it does not have to be. Okay, now the Mishnah Berurah is going to continue, and he's going to give us an interesting case, which is going to lead into a very interesting biur halacha. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ubahadas shahayu b'chol shir arkai. Let's say you have a hadas where throughout its length, so you have a full 3 tefach hadas, and throughout its length, shloisha olim b'chol kain. You had mamish, a beautiful hadas. You had a 3 tefach hadas, which was kulei mishulish from bottom to top, kulei mishulish, exactly the kind of hadas that we want to have. But v'nashar ola achas, 1 leaf has fallen off, mikol kain, from every level, beroiv shir orech hadas, for the majority of the hadas. So again, you had a perfectly beautiful hadas that was kulei mishulish, all the way from the bottom, all the way up to the top. Now, for roiv of the hadas, so let's say a hadas is 12 inches, now roiv of the hadas, 7 inches of the length of the hadas, 1 leaf has fallen off from every level. So now roiv of the hadas only has 2 branches, 2 leaves on every level. So says the Chavetz Chaim, yesh bazeh plukta bein harishonim. Over here we have a machlokes between the rishonim. Yesh machshirin, there are those, and in the Sharet Zion, the Chavetz Chaim brings this down as the Shita of the Ra'ah, the Rabbeinu Yerucham, the Ritva. So yesh machshirin, there are those rishonim who say that this hadas is kosher. Now let's realize, we're faced now with a hadas that does not have roiv mishulish. Roiv of this hadas only has 2 leaves on every level. It doesn't have 3. It originally was kulei mishulish, but 1 leaf has fallen off from every level throughout roiv of this hadas. Still, there are rishonim that say that this is okay, and we really mentioned this in yesterday's shir. Why do these rishonim say that this is okay? Continues the Chavetz Chaim. The kevan de nishar shnayim b'chol kain, because since where 1 leaf fell off, you still have 2. So throughout these 7 inches where one leaf has fallen off on every level you still have 2. Now 2 out of 3 is roiv. So, kevan the nisha shnayim b'chol kain, since at each kain you still have roiv, you're supposed to have 3, now you have 2, that's roiv. Rubai kikulai, we apply the lumdus of rubai kikulai, and we look at every one of those kinim, we look at every level of the hadas, and we say, yeah, it's supposed to be mishulish, it was mishulish, 1 leaf fell off, there's still 2, rubai kikulai. So guess what? Even though it only has 2 leaves, it's still considered a complete cane. Now we go up to the next cane. Oh, there were 3, 1 fell off, there's still 2, rubai kikulai. It's a complete cane. So we look at the entire length of the hadas that way, and even though factually, throughout roiv of the hadas, we only have 2 leaves on every level, we say rubai kikulai on every one, and this hadas is a kosher hadas. Kihechi, the same way, explains the Chavetz Chaim, this is not such a leap, because says the Chavetz Chaim like this, Kihechi, this is very similar to what we just saw in the Mechaber over here in Sif Hey. Kihechi de machshirin ben nashru miktas alav meharka shal hadas. We said that a hadas is 12 gudlin. And we said, if you have 7 gudlin that are mishulish, and you have 5 gudlin where all of the leaves have fallen off, we said that that's a kosher hadas. And why is it a kosher hadas? Because rubai kikulai. Because we look at the hadas and we say, well, we have 7 inches that are mishulish, we have 7 gudlin that are mishulish, we have 5 gudlin that has no leaves, but 7 is roiv out of 12. So rubai kikulai. Since the roiv is mishulish, the whole hadas is considered mishulish. That's what the Mechaber said. Says the Chavetz Chaim, according to these Rishonim look at this case that we just gave, and they apply the same logic. They say, what do we have here? We have a hadas that originally was kulai mishulish. Now, for 7 gudlin of this hadas, 1 leaf has fallen off of each cane. So what? Rubai kikulai. Each cane is supposed to have 3 leaves. 1 fell off, it still has 2, rubai kikulai. So we're applying the rule of rubai kikulai to render this hadas kosher. So these Rishonim say this hadas is perfectly fine. However, v'yesh paislin. However, if you look at the Shar Hatzion, the Chavetz Chaim brings down the Ran and others from the Goinim, and he says v'yesh paislin. However, there are those shittas that say that this hadas would be puzzle. Why? The svira lahu, because these shittas hold, dal yidei zeh loy nishar olav shem avos klal. Very nice. You want to apply the rule of rubai kikulai. Now, in the Mechaber's case over here of Sif Hey, you want to apply rubai kikulai. What are you doing to apply rubai kikulai? We have 7 gudlin of a hadas that are mishulish. We have 5 gudlin of a hadas that don't have any leaves on it. We're not going to use roiv in order to say that this hadas is avos. The fact is that 7 gudlin of this hadas is avos. What we're going to do is we're going to say that since roiv of the hadas is kosher, the entire hadas is considered a kosher hadas. But over here, what is it that you want to say? You want to use roiv at each level of the hadas, and you want to say, since there are 2 leaves left out of 3, 2 out of 3 is a roiv, and it's as if there are 3. But why do we need 3? We need 3 in order to consider it avos. What does avos mean? Avos means plated. Avos means that the branch is surrounded by leaves. Well, guess what? It's not. You want to use a lumdus of rubai kikulai, but avos is a physical fact. It's not avos. They ain't avos ela b'shloisha. So you can't apply over here. These Rishonim want to say you can't apply rubai kikulai here. So v'yesh paislin the sfira lahu, because they hold dal yidei zeloi nishar olav shem avos klal. The bottom line is you cannot call this hadas avos. They ain't avos ela b'shloisha. In order to establish avos, you need 3 leaves. Ol inyan halacha lamaisa, says the Chavetz Chaim, naktinan lahakel b'makam atchak. In a pressing circumstance where you don't have any other hadas, you could rely on this in a makam atchak, shekain hiskimu kama achroinim, because that's the way many achroinim rule. Excuse me. And if you look at the Shar Tzion, Ois Chaf Aleph, he brings this down from the Bach, but he says like this, a little bit further down in Ois Chaf Aleph in the Shar Tzion, Chavetz Chaim goes out of his way to say, we should not use this kula, only in a real makam at chak, k'moshe chasav achai adam, ki yesh min ha'achronim shemaskimim im abeis Yosef, tedas harash v'harayvet gam ken aran, v'im ken roiv ha'paiskim holchid bazel ha'achmir, so you certainly should not use this kula unless it's a very pressing circumstance. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. V'davka keshenish'aru al kol panim shnei olim b'chol kain. And certainly if you want to try to apply this kula, you could only do it if there are 2 leaves at each level. They have a ruba al kol panim, so you could try to use the lamdas of ruba kikulai. Avalim nashu shnei olin b'roiv sher arach hadas. But if 2 leaves have fallen off from each cane over a majority of the length of the hadas, pasal kuli alma, then it's certainly pasal because it's not avos and you don't have a roiv. You only have 1 out of 3. You don't have 2 out of 3. V'im kain, says the Chavetz Chaim, b'makom shenai hagid lotzeis b'hadasim shel shnayim al galbei shnayim kedel el b'haga. If you remember yesterday, the Chavetz Chaim said there were those who had the meaning to rely on a hadas which is 2 over 2. In other words, it's not mishulish. It only has 2 leaves on every level. Im nashar ala achas mikol chein, if 1 leaf would fall off at each level, beroiv shir arach hadas, through the majority of the length of the hadas, pasal l'kulei alma. That hadas would be pasal l'kulei alma, the loy nishar ruba, because now you don't even have a roiv. You have mechza al mechza. You only had 2, 1 leaf fell off. You don't have a roiv. You don't have avos. You don't have a roiv. You don't have anything. Okay, now, I told you that this Chavetz Chaim would lead into an interesting biur halacha. So let's review for a moment. What was the case that the Chavetz Chaim just presented us here? The Chavetz Chaim, if you go back, he said like this: Ahadas shahayu b'chol shir arkoi shloisha olim b'chol kain. The case of the Chavetz Chaim, where we have this machlokes rishonim, the way he presented it to us was, we have a hadas that started off as being kuloi mishulish. We had a hadas that had 3 leaves on every level throughout the entire length of the hadas. And then what happened was, over the majority of the length of the hadas, so let's say 7 gudlin out of 5, 1 leaf fell off from every cane, so that now, on a majority of the length of the hadas, instead of it being mishulish, we only have 2 leaves on every level. In that case, the Chavetz Chaim said, we have this machlokes rishonim, whether or not you can apply the lumdus of rubai kikulai. Now, what's interesting about this is, the Chavetz Chaim specifically mentioned a case where originally the entire hadas, it was kulai mishulish. Now, in the biur halacha, that caught my eye. When I originally read this Chavetz Chaim, I said, very interesting. The case that he's giving me is ahadas shahayu b'chol shir arkoi shloisha olim. It was kulei mishulish to begin with. Says the Chavetz Chaim in the biur halacha, he gives me a little bit of different case. He says like this: how about if you have a hadas? How about if you have a hadas like this? You have a 3 tefach hadas. You have a perfectly good hadas. The majority of the hadas is mishulish. 7 gudlin are mishulish. 5 gudlin are empty of leaves. Now, according to the Mechaber, that hadas is not lechatchila, but it's a kosher hadas. You have uli ikuva berubai, said the Mechaber. So roiv of the hadas is mishulish. Once roiv of the hadas is mishulish, we don't worry about the rest of the hadas. And the Mishnah Berurah told us very clearly, the beginning of Vayis Katan Yud Ches, even if the rest of the hadas is bare of leaves, all the leaves fell off from 5 gudlin of the hadas, but 7 gudlin of the hadas are mishulish. That is a kosher hadas. Asks the Chavetz Chaim in the biur halacha, what if now from the other 7 gudlin, the 7 gudlin of the hadas that are mishulish, 1 leaf fell off from each level. Now, according to some Rishonim, according to the Ra'ah, the Mishnah Berurah gave to me over here a case where he said, you have a hadas which is kulay mishulish, and now from roiv of the hadas, 1 leaf fell off from every cane. We said that according to the Ra'ah, on every level where 1 leaf fell off, we're going to say rubai kikulai, and therefore every one of those levels is considered to be complete with 3 leaves, and therefore we have a hadas that's kula mishulish. It's a wonderful hadas. So now, asks the Chavetz Chaim in the Bir Halacha, could we use the same Ra'ah in the case that I just gave you? Again, what's the case I just gave you? We have a hadas where 7 gudlin of the hadas are mishulish, 5 gudlin of the hadas are empty of leaves, and now from the 7 gudlin of the hadas that are mishulish, 1 leaf fell off from every cane. Could we say rubai kikulai and say, well, each one of those kinim throughout the 7 gudlin still have 2 leaves? So rubai kikulai, so each one of those kinim are still considered mishulish, and therefore we have 7 gudlin mishulish and 5 gudlin empty. It's a kosher hadas. Now that sounds very logical, but the Mishnah Berurah says the reason I'm questioning whether or not that works is because now we are employing roiv twice. What are we doing now? What we're doing is like this. We have 7 gudlin of a hadas where 1 leaf fell off from every level. We're going to employ roiv to say that at every level we still have 2 out of 3, so therefore all of those levels are considered complete with 3 leaves. So that's 1 roiv. That roiv has now established that 7 gudlin out of the 12 are considered mishulish. But now we still need to employ another roiv. We have to say, since we have 7 gudlin that are mishulish, and we only have 5 gudlin that are empty of leaves, rubai kikulai, roiv of the 3 tfachim is mishulish, and rubai kikulai, we have a 3 tefach mishulish hadas. So we're employing 2 roivs. In the case that we saw in the Mishnah Berurah, we're only employing, in the Mechaber, let's say the Mechaber's case, 7 gudlin are perfectly mishulish, 5 gudlin are empty. We're giving 1 roiv. That's 1 roiv. 7 gudlin mishulish, 5 gudlin empty of leaves, rubai kikulai, it's a 3 tefach hadas, it's a good hadas. In the Mishnah Berurah's case, we had a hadas that was kulai mishulish from top to bottom. 1 leaf fell off from every level throughout 7 gudlin. Okay, 1 roiv. 1 roiv says that on each level, rubai kikulai, and we still have 7 gudlin that are mishulish. That's also 1 roiv. But here in this case, we're combining the case of the Mechaber and the case of the Ra'ah. And what we're doing is, we're saying we have 7 gudlin that have leaves, 5 gudlin that are empty of leaves. So we're going to need 1 roiv to say that since roiv of the hadas, roiv of 3 tvachim, has leaves, rubai kikulai. But we're going to need another roiv because on the 7 gudlin that have leaves, we lost 1 leaf from each cane, and we have to say rubai kikulai on all of those kinim to make them all mishulish. So the Bir Halacha wonders, can we employ 2 roivs to make the hadas kosher? It's a lengthy Bir Halacha, but it's a fascinating Bir Halacha if you want to take a look at it. Okay, that took a lot of time, and I want to cover two pages today, so let's go weiter. Ice cotton yud test. So the Mechaber told me that for the mitzvah, to be becoming the mitzvah properly, the hadas should be kulei mishulish, but as far as li'ikuva, as far as minimal requirements, we only need roiv, and the Rambam put in the words va'afilu einoi beroishai, that roiv of the hadas that's mishulish does not have to be at the top. Ice cotton yud test va'afilu einoi beroishai. Going for example, shemilabata ad rubai, maybe from the bottom of the hadas up until the majority of its length, yotzei b'chalkein v'kein shloisha alin, on each level you have 3 leaves. Ulamaila, but then above that, nashru alav, its leaves have fallen off. Or maybe they didn't all fall off. Shehu einenu avos. or you don't have, it's not mishulish, you don't have 3 leaves on every level, gam ken kosher, it's still kosher. Va'afal gav de biyavshu olav. Even though we're going to see shortly when it comes to a hadas that dried out. Pasak b'sivches. We pass it in sivches. The ain't kosher, that the hadas is not kosher. We're going to see that when it comes to a hadas that dries up, there is a mila to the top of the hadas over the rest of the hadas. You can have a hadas that dried up, but if it has good moist leaves at the top, then the hadas could still be considered kosher. So you see that there is a supremacy over the top, for the top of the hadas over the rest of the hadas. That's in the context of the halacha of a hadas that dried out. Sham hatam mishum hadar. We're going to see that over there the reason is because a dried out hadas is not considered hadar. The leaves don't look nice. They're dried out, they turned white, they turned pale. That's a chesaron of hadar. But if the tip of the hadas is still hadar, so then when you look at it, you see the tip, it still has an aspect of hadar and it could be kosher. For hadar nikar kishuhu b'roishai. The hadar at the tip of the hadas could save the hadas. Aval kan, but over here we're talking about a question of avos, whether we're fulfilling the requirement of the Torah of anaf eitz avos, that it has to be mishulish. Aval kan mishum avos. Over here we're dealing with the requirement of avos, v'dai b'chol makayim, and it's sufficient to even have avos in the majority of the lower part of the hadas. We don't need it to be at the upper part of the hadas. Now that we've mentioned the question of a dried out hadas, let's go on to Sif Zayin in the Mechaber, second line down in the Shulchan Aruch, says the Mechaber. I'm sorry. We're actually up to Sif Vav, end of the first line in the Mechaber. Yavshu olav. If the leaves of the hadas have dried up, puzzle, the hadas is puzzle. However, kamshu, if they didn't dry up, if they withered, kosher, then it is still kosher. There's no Mishnah Berurah here. Let's go on to Sif Zayin, where we get into the weeds of the question of a dried out hadas. Shir hayaveshus. How do we measure the dryness of a hadas? What constitutes a dried out hadas? Says the Mechaber. Afilu im nifrach batziporin. Even if the leaves of the hadas are so dry that if you press on them with your nail, they will crumble. Still, im adayin yerukim heim, if they're still green, the Mechaber says kosher, they're still kosher. Ve'enam nikram yeveshim, and they are not called dried out as far as puzzling them, ela kishi albinu peneihem, until it reaches a point where they lose their green color and they become pale, they become whitened. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ois Katan Chaf. Kishi albinu peneihem, says the Chavetz Chaim, la'achar shenifrach b'tziporin. The Magen Avraham says you need both. You need it to turn pale and to crumble from the pressure of a fingernail. If you're missing one, if it crumbles from a fingernail but it's not pale, or it's pale but it doesn't crumble from a fingernail, that's not yavesh, says the Magen Avraham, that's still kosher. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, ube'emes, truth be told, einoi matzoi b'mitzias, you're simply not going to find such a mitzias, she'albinu panav, where the leaves have become pale, v'lo yeh nifrach b'tziporin, and it doesn't break apart, it doesn't crumble from the pressure of a nail, v'imkein, and therefore, kishen islabein peneihem, if you see that the leaves have taka become pale, vada yaveshu, that is certainly yavesh, and don't go ahead and test it with your fingernail, it's irrelevant. If you see that it's whitened, then it's already dried out and it's puzzled. If you don't know how to measure this, mashma b'tmim deim, the tmim deim suggests a way that you could test the hadas, and obviously you're going to have to do this before Yom Tov because you need time. He gives a way to test the hadas to see if it's yavish. Sheyachal l'sha'er, you could measure al yedei sheyashra oisam yom o yomayim b'mayim. He says take the branch of the hadas, soak it in water for a couple of days. The im yachzeru l'kamoisha hayu, if it returns to its original state, b'mishmushan, as far as how they feel, uvemar'ehen, and in their appearance, then adayin lachim heim, that means that they're still moist, if im lav, and if not, heim yaveshim, they are dried out. Kasav HaPri Begadim, the Pri Begadim writes, the biyavesh eitz hahadas, that if the wooden branch of the hadas dries out, even if the leaves are still green, puzzle, that hadas is puzzle. The Berurah Yaakov comments on this and he says, as far as the twig itself drying out, loy shaykh psul klal. The Berurah Yaakov does not recognize such a psul as the twig of the hadas drying out. The psul of yavesh is on the leaves, not on the twig. Ayin sham. Now let's go on to Sivches. 3 lines down, in middle of the line, says the Mechaber. Yavshu roiv olav. If indeed the majority of the leaves of the hadas have dried out, they've turned pale and they are yavish. But v'nishtayru beroish kol bad me'ashloisha badin. But at the tip of each branch of the hadas. Remember, in your lulav you have 3 hadasim. So v'nishtayru, there yet remains beroish kol bad, at the top of each branch, me'ashloisha badin, from the 3 branches of the hadasim, kain echad, one level, one kain, one level of the hadas, uboy shloisha alin lachen, and all the way at the tip, you still have 1 kain that's mishulish, and it's mishulish with 3 moist leaves. Kosher, the hadas is kosher. So again, what did the Mechaber just tell me according to this day of Rishayna, this first opinion here in Sivches? We know that a hadas that's dried out is puzzle. What constitutes a dried out hadas? If the majority of the leaves have turned pale, that is a hadas yavesh, and that is puzzle. Says the Mechaber here, according to the first opinion here in Sivches, there's a way yet where the hadas can be saved. How is that? If even the majority of the leaves of the hadas have turned pale, and they are yavesh, but all the way at the tip of the branch, there is yet remaining 1 kain, 1 level, that's mishulish and is still lach, it's still green, that saves the hadas. And the way the Mechaber wrote it was, he said that we have 3 hadasim. So if at the tip of each one of the 3 hadasim, you still have 1 kain, that's mishulish and lach, that saves your hadasim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Chaf Aleph. Vinishtayru, there yet remains 1 mishulish kain that's moist at the tip of each hadas. Because through these 3 moist leaves that are all the way at the tip of the branch of the hadas, chol shem hadar al kol hadas. Again, the chesaron of yavesh is that it's no longer considered hadar. But if there's 1 kain that's mishulish and lach at the tip of the hadas, it still is considered hadar. Chav beis, beroish kol bad me'ashloisha badin. The way the Mechaber wrote this was, you have 1 kain, you have 1 level that is still, that is mishulish and is lach at the tip of each one of the 3 branches. Says the Mishnah Berurah, based on what we're going to see shortly in Siman Taf Reish Nun Aleph B'Yirtz Hashem, the B'shasat Chak, that in a pressing circumstance, Sagi Bebad Hadas Echad, you could be Yotze the mitzvah of Dalin Minim with only 1 branch of Hadasim. In a Shasat Chak, if you don't have 3 Hadasim, you have 1, you could be Yotze. God be Yonenu, so too in the context of the halacha that we just learned here, Dai Kishiyah Baroshai Kain Echad Shel Shloisha Alin Laken. What the Mishnah Berurah is telling me is the Mechaber was very specific, and he said that you could save your hadasim. You have 3 hadasim if at the tip of each one of the 3 there's 1 kain that's lach and is mishulish, that saves your hadasim. Says the Chavetz Chaim, that's the chatchila, you need 3 branches. But if you're stuck in a shas of chak and you're being yotzei the mitzvah with 1 branch, so then if that 1 branch has 1 kain that's mishulish and lach, while the rest of it is yavesh, that will save your hadas and you'll be yotzei the mitzvah. Now we go on to the second opinion that the Mechaber brings here in Sivches, 3 lines from the bottom, a little more than halfway through the line by the Ois Katan Chav Gimel for the Mishnah Berurah. V'yesh mefarshim. The Mechaber brings down a Yesh Mefarshim who is actually the Rosh, and it's a little tricky. The phraseology of the Mechaber, as we're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah, is a little bit tricky here. Says the Mechaber, V'yesh Mefarshim, there are those that say, and that's the Rosh, Sha'afilu im mehashloisha shebechad kina yovshu shnayim. The Mechaber said you could save the hadas. How? If at the tip of the hadas you have one cane, one level, that's mishulish, and all three leaves alach, that could save the hadas because it's still considered mu'uder. Now he brings down the Rosh. The Rosh is even more makel. He says, "She'afilu im me'ashloisha shebechad kina yavshu shnayim." Let's say that cane that has three leaves on it at the tip of the lulav, not all three leaves are lach, two of them are yavesh, but one of them is still lach. V'lo nishar kiyem echad lach. You only have one leaf that's still lach. Kosher. The hadas is kosher, with a caveat: v'hu sheyeh ha'olah shehu murkav al shnayim. The caveat is that leaf has to be the primary leaf of the cane. What does that mean? So the way the Rosh describes it, it has to be the leaf that is above the other two. And the way the Mishnah Berurah and others, including Rabbi Akiva Eiger, the way they understand the Rosh, which is a little puzzling to me, but I'm not going to argue, it's the Mishnah Berurah, it's Rabbi Akiva Eiger, the way they understand the Rosh is that this cane at the tip of the lulav that we're talking about is not really the way it's supposed to be. It's not mishulish that all three leaves are on the same level. It's a cane of a hadas shoita. It's a cane where you have two leaves on one level and a third leaf that's a little higher. Says the Rosh, you have a hadas, which is yavesh, but all the way at the tip of the lulav, you have a cane that has two leaves that are dried out, but it has one leaf a little higher that's moist. That saves the hadas. Now, the way I just gave it to you is the way the Mechaber writes it. But now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Chav Gimel, V'yesh Mefarshim, says the Chavetz Chaim, Hu Das HaRosh. This is the opinion of the Rosh. Uladidei, and according to the Rosh, Loi Be'inon Sheyehei Hakein B'roishay Dafka. First of all, the Chavetz Chaim lets us know the Rosh, if you take a look at the Rosh doesn't say, like the first opinion of the Mechaber. The first opinion of the Mechaber says that this cane that's going to rescue the entire hadas has to be located at the tip of the hadas. The Rosh doesn't say that. The Rosh, it could be anywhere on the hadas. As long as you have a cane of three leaves anywhere on the hadas that's still lach, it could save the hadas. But it gets better. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Chav Dalet. Kosher. This hadas would be kosher. He says ayin barosh. He says, you know what? Better take a look at the Rosh, says the Chavetz Chaim. Disvirle, if you read the Rosh, actually what the Rosh holds is that tzarich sheyishtayer shloisha kinin. The way the Mechaber wrote it, the Mechaber said the Dirshu Shaina holds that one cane at the tip of the lulav, of the hadas, could save the whole hadas. You have one cane at the tip that's mishulish and it's lach, it saves the whole hadas. Says the Mechaber, does the Yesh Mefarshim, does the Rosh. Ooh, the Rosh is even more makel. What's the kula? Not only one cane at the tip of the lulav, one leaf from one cane is enough to save the lulav. Says the Chavetz Chaim, wait a second, take a look at the Rosh. It's not what the Rosh says. The Rosh says that tzar sheyishtayer shloisha kinin. You need 3 kinim. You need 3 levels on the hadas. Ubechol kain ola echad lach b'roishay. If you have 3 kinim, 3 levels on the hadas, and on each one of those 3 levels you have 1 leaf that's lach, that's what will save the lulav. The tamu achroinim ala mechaber, and the achroinim ask in wonderment on the mechaber, shalei hiskir davar zeh. The achroinim ask on the mechaber seems to be misrepresenting what the Rosh says. Okay, that's what can I tell you? That's what the Chavetz Chaim says, and that's what the achroinim say. Ois katan chafei V'hu, and then the caveat of the rush was, when is one leaf okay in that cane? It has to be the primary leaf. What does the primary leaf mean? It's going to be above the other ones. It's going to be above the other ones. That means that cane is a hadash shaita. Says the Chavetz Chaim is cut l'chav hey. Ritzayin loymar madam achsherinan ba'ala echad lach b'roshai. When could one leave from one cane, or like we've seen from 3 kinim, save the hadas? Dafka boifin zeh, only in this case shehu murkov al shneihem, where that leaf is above the other leaves. Da'oz nira hahider yoiser. Because in that case, we can understand how one leaf is going to go ahead and save the entire cane. Why? Because since this one leaf is higher than the other 2, and it is green and it is lach, so it shows off the hadar aspect because it's the primary leaf of the cane. But if all 3 leaves are still lach, afilu kulan b'shavek kosher. The rush is not coming to be machmir, that in order to save the hadas, you must have one leaf above the other one. That's only when you only have one leaf that's lach. If you're trying to save a hadas through using one leaf that's lach on a cane of 3, then that leaf has to be higher than the other 2. But if you're going with the mechaber, where you have a whole cane, you have 3 leaves that are lach, then it's okay if they're all on the same level. And now we come to the Shvera Mishnah Berurah. It's called Chavav. The caveat of the rush was, in the rush's case, where you're trying to save the hadas with one moist leaf on a cane of 3, it has to be the primary leaf, shehu murkav al shneihem. So right away, the Chavetz Chaim asks, what you're describing is a hadash shaita. When you tell me that the one leaf that's lach is higher than the other 2 on its level, that's the description of a hadash shaita. That's trei v'chad. That's 2 leaves on one level and another leaf a little bit higher. Says the Chavetz Chaim, after b'sif gimel pasuk b'chaber zeh b'klal hadash shaita. In Sif Gimel we learned that that's what's called a hadash shaita, and that's not even considered a kosher hadas. So how is the rush giving me a case where the one leaf that's going to save the hadas is in a situation of a hadash shaita? A hadash shaita is not a kosher hadas. So the Chavetz Chaim explains, and he says, after it's possible, the sham, that over there in Siv Gimel, when we said that a hadash shaita is not kosher, my rishaya kol oirek shira hadas beifin zeh. We're talking about that the entire length of the hadas, or roiv of the hadas, is a hadash shaita. It's trei v'chad, trei v'chad, trei v'chad. Ve'ena b'chlal hadas ha'amr b'Torah, so that's not the hadas that the Torah describes, ela hadash shaita. Aval hacha, but over here, where we're talking about a hadas that's yavesh, and we're trying to rescue a hadas yavesh, and the Rosh is saying that we could rescue a hadas yavesh with a big kula, and that is that there are 3 kinim of the hadas, where only one leaf on each cane is lach, and it's going to rescue the hadas, because by each one of those kinim, that one leaf that's lach is the primary leaf, because it's higher than the other 2 on its level. Here we're talking about a hadas where the majority of the hadas is properly mishulish. It's not a hadas shaita. The majority of the hadas is a hadas mishulish. 3 leaves on the same level at every cane. Ella, shemachma shahayu yaveshin like nikra hadar. This hadas had a problem that it dried out, and since it dried out, it's not hadar. V'lachein, and therefore, in order to rescue this hadas, amrinon, we're willing to say, D'im nimtza shloisha kinim, if we could find 3 kinim anywhere on this hadas. So we have a hadas where 9 out of 12 gudlin of this hadas is mamish mishulish properly, 3 leaves on every level, but it's dried out. So we're trying to rescue the hadas. When we examine the hadas, we find 3 kinim, we find 3 levels that are hadash shaita, that are 2 leaves and 1 higher. And on all of those 3 leaves, on all of those 3 levels, the leaf that's 1 higher is green. Says the Rosh, that could rescue the hadas. So nimtza shloisha kinin, we found 3 kinin, we found 3 levels. Ubechol echad, ala echad shehu murkav al shteihem v'hu lach. and on each one of those levels, it happens to be that there's one leaf higher than the other two, and it's green, it's lach, nirev and nikar by hahidr v'kosher. That shows off the hidr of the hadas, and the hadas is yet kosher. V'halacha kedeya harishayna, and the Mishnah Berurah concludes, and he says that we paskin halacha l'maisa like the Deya Rishayna over here in Sivches, which is if you want to rescue a hadas yavesh, if you have a hadas that's dried out, the majority of the leaves have gone pale, in order to rescue that hadas, you need a cane, you need one level at the tip of the hadas that is mishulish, and all three leaves are lach. Okay, wow. This took a lot longer than I expected, but I'm going to press on because we want to catch up. Let's go to Siftes. Says the Mechaber, you have a hadas which is yavesh, and now you're trying to rescue the hadas with these three moist leaves at the top of the lulav. Says the Mechaber, im oisam olim shelo yavshu heim kimushin. In Siv Vav we said that a hadas yavesh, a hadas where the leaves have dried out, they've gone pale, that is puzzle. But if it's kamshu, if they didn't go pale, but they are withered, they're dry and they're shriveled, but they're still green, we said that's kosher. Now, says the Mechaber, im oisam olim shelo yavshu heim kimushin, if the leaves that you're trying to employ at the tip of the hadas are not yavesh, but they are kamush, yesh poislin, there are those, there's the Ravid, who says that hadas is puzzle, v'yesh machshirin, but you have the Rush, who holds that it's kosher. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut and test, bottom line, Taimam, the reason why the Ravid would say that this is puzzle, he says, what's the chesaron of yavesh? The chesaron of yavesh is hadar. This is not hadar. It's not a beautiful hadas. It's dried out. We said you could rescue the hadas if at the tip of the hadas there are still three moist leaves. Why? Because then at the tip of the hadas you still have hadar. And the tip of the hadas is what people see right away. It's the primary part of the hadas. So if we have hadar at the top of the hadas, we could rescue the hadas. Says the Ravid, if even the three leaves at the tip of the hadas that you're trying to use to rescue the hadas are not perfect, they're kamush, they're withered, you can't save a hadas. Yes, if all of the leaves would only be kamush, it would still be kosher. But if you're trying to rescue a hadas, you're trying to turn a dried out hadas, you're still trying to retain a vestige of hadar, you can't do that with leaves that are kamush. Taima, she'ein matzel midei yavesh el alacha hadar. If you want to rescue the hadas from being considered yavesh, you need real hadar. You need lach. V'yesh machshirin, but the Rush disagrees. Kevin the kamush kosher, because he says lamaisa. We said in Sivav that kamush is kosher. So yachal lahatzel kamay lach. So kamush could save the same way lach mamish can. And we turn the page for ayin b'prima gadim shepasak to be a rishon shehu daraisa. The Prima Gadim says on the first day of Yom Tov, when the mitzvah of Dalminim is a mitzvah daraisa, roy lahachmir duhu safik Torah, we should be machmir like the Ravid, and we should not use it if the three leaves at the tip are kamush. Ubishar yamim shu darabanan safik darabanan lahakel. Now we go to Sif Yud. Now at the top line of Kuf Yudalad Amud Beis. Now before I read Sif Yud to you, I'm going to turn to a Mishnah on Daf Lamed Beis Amud Beis in Masechta Sukkah, where the Mishnah tells me Niktam Roishoi. Niktam Roishoi. If the top of the hadas was chopped off, says the Mishnah, puzzle. The top of the hadas was chopped off, the hadas is puzzle. Very nice. Mishnah Lamed Beis Amud Beis in Masechta Sukkah. Now let's go to Lamed Daled Amud Beis in Masechta Sukkah. Lamed Daled Amud Beis, the Mishnah starts off with the sheet of Rabbi Shmuel. Very famous. We pass it like this lahalacha. Rabbi Shmuel says, how are you mekayim the mitzvah of daled minim? Shloisha hadasim, you need 3 hadasim. Ushtei aravos, 2 aravos. Lulav echad, 1 lulav. Ve'esrag echad, and 1 esrag. And then he says, afilu shnayim ketumim, when it comes to the 3 hadasim, even if 2 of them are chopped, ve'echad eina kotum, and 1 is not chopped, you could be yotze the mitzvah. Reb Tarfon says, Afilu shloshton kitumim. Even if all 3 hadas branches are chopped, you could still be yotze the mitzvah. Very odd. We have a Mishnah on limud beis that says hadas, it's niktam, the top is chopped off, it's puzzle. We have a Mishnah here on limud daled amud beis where Reb Tarfon says even if all 3 hadasim are niktam, it's kosher. Okay, so you'll tell me, Rabbi Weiss, what's the big deal? We have a machlekes tanoim from limud beis to limud daled amud beis. Okay, could be. Says the Gemara over here on limud daled amud beis, Amar Shmuel halacha keRebbi Tarfon. The halacha is like Reb Tarfon. Well, if the halacha is like Reb Tarfon, it would seem that a lulav that's niktam roishoi, right? A lulav that's niktam roishoi would be kosher. Okay, fine, very nice. Niktam roishoi is kosher. Well, Sif Yud, Kuf Yud Daled Amud Beis, says the Mechaber, niktam roishoi kosher. Okay, very nice. And if you take a look at Ois Pei in the Be'er HaGola on the side here, the Be'er HaGola says Mishnah Sham Lamed Daled Amud Beis. This is based on a Mishnah on Lamed Daled Amud Beis u'Rebbi Tarfon. So this is Reb Tarfon in the Mishnah on Lamed Daled Amud Beis, who says that you need 3 hadasim, and even if all 3 of them are niktam, it's still kosher. And the Gemara said that the halachos is like Reb Tarfon. Very nice. So far so good. Sif Yud, Niktam Roishai, the top of the hadas was chopped off. Kosher, the hadas is kosher. Continues the Mechaber, Afilu loy also by tomorrow. This is true even if there is no berry at the top of the hadas. What's the point? The point is you might have thought maybe the hadas is kosher if the top is chopped off, if there's a berry at the tip. If there's a berry at the tip, that it's not recognizable that the top was chopped off. You can't see the chopped top of the hadas. Says the Mechaber, no, don't think that way. It's kosher, afilu loy also by tomorrow. Even if there's no berry at the top, it is still kosher. Continues the Mechaber, v'hu adin liyavesh roishai. Just the same way that the hadas is kosher if the top is chopped off, the hadas is also kosher if the top of the hadas dried out. Doesn't matter. If the top of it dried out, but the rest of it did not dry out, it's kosher. Let's stop over here for a second, and let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah's Chav Ches. Niktam roishai. If the top of the hadas was chopped off, the Mechaber said the hadas is kosher. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Hainu afilu hayu kol shloisha habadin niktamu roishan. Chavetz Chaim says, even if all 3 branches of the hadas are niktam roishai, the tops were chopped off, it's still kosher. Again, that's Reb Tarfon in the Mishnah Lamed Daled Amud Beis, and the Gemara said that the halach is like Reb Tarfon. Ois Katan Chav Tes, kosher, this hadas is kosher. Points out the Chavetz Chaim, ve'ein doime lululav va'arava. In this way, the hadas is different than both the lulav and the arava. The niktam roishai pasul behen. Because by the lulav and the arava, we already learned this by the lulav. If you chop off the top of the lulav is puzzle. If you chop off the top of the arava is puzzle. But if you chop off the top of the hadas, according to the first opinion of the Mechaber here in Siv Yud, that hadas is kosher. And the Mishnah Berurah explains why. The bahadas, because when it comes to the hadas, enough of the leaves of the hadas, chayfin roishai, they cover up the branch. Ve'ein kitimasai nikeres bahen. There's no loss of hadar over here when the top of the hadas is chopped off, because again, it's anaf eitz avos, it's plated, and the leaves cover over the branch, so you can't see that the top was chopped off, and that's why by the hadas, niktar roishai is kosher. Ois cut lamed afilu also by tomorrow, and it's kosher even without the presence of a berry at the tip. Who came in tomorrow? It's called a tomorrow because the berry is a little bit similar to like a small date, hayotzes ba'ale arava, that grows on the leaves of the aravos. De bazeh bevadei kosher l'kulei alma. If it would have a berry, it would certainly be kosher. Shat tomorrow mechasa al haketima, because that berry would cover up the chopped point of the hadas, ve'ein haketima nikeres, and then certainly the chopped off point would not be recognizable. Okay, let's go back to the Shulchan Aruch, to the Mechaber. So far we've seen over here a psak from the Mechaber that is very much in line with the Mishnah on Lamed Daled Lamed Beis, with the Shita of Reb Tarfon, and with the Gemara that says that we paskin like Reb Tarfon. Continues the Mechaber, however, on the second line, and the Mechaber says, V'yesh poislin b'niktam roishai. However, the Ravid, you take a look at the Be'er Gola Ois Katan Tzadik, the Ravid, V'yesh poislin b'niktam roishai. He says niktam roishai. Niktam roishai is possible. Now, based on what would niktam roishai be possible? We had a Mishnah, Lamed Daled Lamed Beis. It said niktam roishai is kosher. And we have a Gemara, Shmuel, who says that halacha is like Reb Tarfon. So why is it possible? Well, let's take a look first at the Mishnah Berurah, Katan Lamed Aleph. V'yesh poislin, there are those, the Ravid, who says it's possible. V'hu adin l'yavesh roishai l'deyazu. This opinion on the Ravid would hold that not only is the hadas puzzle if the top is chopped off, it's also puzzle if the top is dried out. Mikri yavesh roishai, and it's obvious that we do not consider it yavesh roishai rak bihilbinu panav, only if it became pale. Ma'ashe'ena motzei klal b'hadasim shegadlu b'shanazu. Chavetz Chaim says it would be very rare to find a hadas that happens to if it grew this year. Avalim komush k'tzas polvad. But if you have a hadas where the tip of the hadas withered but it didn't dry out, even if it crumbles from the pressure of a fingernail, loy mikri yavesh, that is not considered a hadas yavesh. Ta'afilu b'sharo loy mikri yavesh. Ki hay gavdo k'dei el b'sif zayin, like we saw in Sif Zayin, that is not called yavesh. Ois Katan Lamed Beis. The Ravid pasels the hadas beniktam roishai. What's the psal? Mishum delay heavy hadar, because it's not considered hadar. Yesh la'ayin l'deyazu. The Chavetz Chaim says, according to this Ravid, who pasels a hadas when the top is chopped off, we have to be ma'ayin. Im davka kishahayu kol shloisha badin kitume roishan. Is the problem if all three of your hadas branches have the tips chopped off? Ayafilu im badecha diktam roishai. Or do you even have a problem if only one of your hadas twigs has the top chopped off? Gamkein puzzle. Maybe it's still puzzle. V'ayil kaman siman tef reish nun aleph sif aleph bahaga. He says we can see that a little bit further in the in siman tef reish nun aleph. Now, before I explain where this psak, what this psak is based on, let's go to the Ramah, one line down in the middle of the line in the Shulchan Aruch. Haggah says to Ramah, what do we do lemaisa with this machlokes? We have one opinion that niktam roishai, if the top of the hadas is chopped off, it's kosher. We have a second opinion that it's possible. What do we do lemaisa? Says the Ramah, v'toiv lahachmir b'makom she'efsher ba'acher. It would be proper to be machmir like the shita of the Ravid in a case where you do have another hadas to use. And further, the Ramah says, but you should know, v'loy mikri niktam, we don't call a hadas niktam, we don't consider it that the top was chopped off, elo im niktamu ha'etzim. The actual wooden branch of the hadas has to be chopped. Not that the leaves at the tip are chopped. The wood, the branch has to be chopped. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Katan Lamed Gimel. V'toiv lahachmir, it would be proper to be machmir. Very often you see a hadas where there are little branches that branch off of the twig of the hadas. Sometimes you see little branches coming off on the middle of the hadas. And the Mishnah Berurah says you need to cut them off. So that they should not make a separation between the different levels, or the way the Chazon Ish explains this, so that they don't make a separation between the three leaves of the cane. So the Chavetz Chaim says you need to cut them off. Niktam zeh kosher l'kuli alma. That is not a problem of niktam. The problem of niktam is when the top of the hadas is chopped off. Not if you chopped off little branches from the middle. Even if all three of your hadas twigs have those little branches and you had to cut them off, that's fine. You should be machmir when you can if you have another hadas. Ubach Kosav, the Bach writes, the Biyavesh Roshai, in a case where the top of the hadas became dried out, V'hainu biyavshu ha'olin ha'elyonim, that means that the 3 leaves at the top of the hadas have dried out, they turn pale. Afilu i'efshar ba'acher ein levarech alav, even if you don't have another one to use, you should not make a bracha on that hadas. Aval yesh takana, but there's a simple way to fix this. Sheyaser ha'olin ha'elyonim, just remove the top leaves, because we don't need them. Remember, if you have roiv, you're okay. Va'az kasha lechatchila l'kulei alma. It's cut lamid hey, ha'etzim. In order to be considered niktam, the actual wooden branch of the hadas has to be chopped off. Aval niktamu ha'olin ha'elyonim. If the upper leaves got chopped off levad, loy mikri niktam, that's not called niktam. Okay, so we had 2 opinions over here in Sif Yud. We have one opinion that seems to be very well aligned with the Mishnah on Lamed Daled Amud Beis, the Shita of Reb Tarfon. That is that you need 3 hadas branches, but even if all 3 of them have the tips chopped off, the hadasim are still kosher. And we had the Gemara Shmuel that says that the halacha follows Reb Tarfon. But then we have the Ravid, the Yesh Paislim, that says that Niktam Roshai is puzzle. How does the Ravid get away with the Gemara on Lamed Daled Amud Beis, where Shmuel says that the halacha follows Reb Tarfon? The quick answer to that is that the Ravid holds that the Mishnah on Lamed Daled Amud Beis and the Mishnah on Lamed Beis Amud Beis are not discussing the same case, and that's going to lead us back into the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Lamed Gimel that we just learned. According to the Ravid, the Mishnah on Lamed Beis Amud Beis is discussing a hadas where the top became chopped off. And the Mishnah Lamed Beis Amud Beis says, Niktam is puzzle. So, if the top of the hadas became chopped off, it's puzzle, says the Ravid. Beferish Mishnah Lamed Beis Amud Beis. The Mishnah on Lamed Daled Amud Beis? Reb Tarfon? Reb Tarfon's not talking about a hadas where the top got chopped off. Reb Tarfon, says the Ravid, is talking about a hadas that has branches coming off it in the middle, and you chopped off those branches. Says Reb Tarfon, a hadas which is niktam, which is chopped, because you chopped off little branches in the middle of the hadas along its length, that's kosher. Says Shmuel, the halach is like Reb Tarfon, that hadas is kosher. And that brings us back to Ois Katan Lamed Gimel, where the Mishnah Berurah says, if you have hadasim that have branches coming off in the middle, and you cut off those branches, that is fine. Niktam zeh kosher l'kulei alma. That is certainly fine. According to the Ravid, that's what the Gemara means on Lamed Daled Amud Beis. According to the other Rishonim, who hold that Reb Tarfon is talking about Niktam Roshai, so there was never any place where there was a suggestion to passel a lulav that's cut off on the middle, where branches are cut off in the middle. Now, the other thing I would point out is that the Mishnah Berurah says over here in Lamed Gimel that if you have a hadas that has those branches coming off in the middle, you have to cut them off. And if you take a look in the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah, in the back on page 77, in Dirshu footnote 54, I'm not going to read it because we're so way above overtime. He brings down here from the Chazon Ish that the source for the need to cut off those branches is from a Ran. And the Ran says, Vehein mafsikin bekane hahadas, the reason you have to chop them off is because they interfere. They are an interposition in the cane. Remember, a cane is the level. One level is called a cane. The Ran says you need to cut those branches off because they serve as an interposition between the leaves of the cane. So you might have 2 leaves on a cane, and then a little branch coming out, and then the 3rd leaf. Well, that's not anef eitz avos. Now the 3 leaves are not covering the branch because at one point they're separated where a branch comes out, and that's why you would need to cut those little side branches off. Finally, I'm going to go to the last sif of the Siman, Sif Yod Aleph, says the Mechaber. Im ein loy elahadas she'anovav merubim me'olav. If you only have available to you a hadas that has more berries than it does leaves, and I guess this means that the berries are a problematic color, they must be, I guess, black or red, because in Sif in Sif Sif Sif. In Sif Beis on Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, we said that if you have more berries than leaves, but the berries are green, that's fine. Over here, the Mechaber is, I guess, addressing a case where you have a hadas which is problematic, so it has more berries than leaves, and the berries are a problematic color, they're black or red. You should take it, you should use it, but you should not make a bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Lamed Vav Noitloi ve'enim avarakalav upasal afilu b'shar yamim. You cannot make a bracha with this hadas. Not only on the first, can you not use it on the first day of Yom Tov, but even the rest of Yom Tov you cannot use it. But you should use it, but you can't make a bracha on it. Ulefi dvarav, and according to this Beis Yosef, im nizdamad loy achakach hadasim acherim, if you would have the opportunity to take a different lulav with different hadasim, tzarich levarich b'shar yomim gamkein, you would have to make a bracha on that lulav. So if you're telling me that this hadas is possible, why are you telling me noitloi? Why are you taking it? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, the reason you're going to take it, even though you can't be yotze in the mitzvah with it, and you can't make a bracha, kedei shaloi tishtakach toras lulav, is only so that toras lulav should not be forgotten. The ayin b'bir halacha. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for such a long share. Thank you for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua's refuahs and parnas and shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the B'Yisrael Tzedek, b'meher v'yameinu, and thank you for bearing with me while we catch up another day on the Dirshu schedule after losing time over Yom Tov. Be well.